Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Joining us on the program today is a professional who has more than 30 years of helping people grow businesses and manages companies that provide professional services to the government. That's right, if you've got a small business and perhaps you've got a service or a particular thing a government needs, a government contract may be in your stars. Our guest offers help for entrepreneurs who want to build a successful government contracting business. He's spent more than 30 years, as I mentioned earlier in the program, managing companies that provide professional services. At SRA International, he's served in many leadership roles, from project manager to chief operating officer during a time when SRA grew from $5 million in annual revenue to over $1 billion. His newest book is Zero to a Billion, 61 Rules Entrepreneurs Need to Know to Grow Government Contracting Businesses. I'd like to welcome to the program today our guest, David Kriegman. David, thank you for being on the program today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
You know, when you put government and contracting in there, especially for an entrepreneur or business owner, that can seem kind of intimidating from the way people see government. Now, what did you do when it came to approaching this particular way of growing a business?
Well, I think that the key thing is there is a difference in growing government than commercial. I think the entire business model is a little bit different, the way the government contracts. You really have to build relationships up front. So it's really kind of backwards from going to buy a car, for example. When you first go to a car dealer to buy a car, you don't even want to talk to the salesperson. You just want to look at a car, then later on you ask some questions, go for a test drive, and then when you really get ready to buy, you're exchanging all sorts of information. You're saying, you know, the dealer up the street has the same car but more options or lower price. You really get into detailed negotiations. In the government business, it's actually backwards. The government, you have to build the relationships up front, learn everything up front, and then the government will issue a formal request for proposal or something equivalent, and you have to reply in writing. And once that happens, you have very little independent conversations with the government. So the communication gets less as you get closer to buy instead of more. So you really have to understand the customer's problem, their mission, what you're going to do, what you're going to offer them way earlier in the sales process than you do in the commercial world. But it's a pretty good market because I will say that the government contracts out for professional services. This is not weapon systems, not hardware, not commercial buys, but for professional services. They contract out about $2.5 to $3 billion, $300 billion a year, $300 billion with a B dollars a year.
Now, what types of service, I guess the first question to ask is, why does the government want to contract out to, let's say, private businesses or companies? What's going on in the government that they reach out like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's several advantages for contracting out rather than hiring government employees. You know, when you hire government employees, they become civil service employees. It becomes much more difficult to terminate them if they get a budget cut or projects go away or short-term projects. With contractors, you get hired for a task and there's no long-term obligation. So it lessens the long-term obligation for the government. And the government, frankly, doesn't have authorization to hire as many people as they need to get their mission done, to get their job done. So they rely on contractors. And this is true for both the defense side and civil government side. All the civil agencies rely on contractors as well.
So now for our listeners who may be entrepreneurs, we don't really know, but we're certain they're out there, what types of services do you find common or things government looks for when it comes to private contracts? What kind of businesses are those?
You know, it spans a lot of things. So there's a whole lot of IT, computer systems, dollars, running networks, running security, of course, is big these days, security of networks, building software systems, doing data analysis, data analytics. You know, the government collects a lot of data. And just analyzing that data is a major problem. So there's a whole lot of IT work related to software, to systems, to data, to networks, to communications. But there's also general analysis support. There's running help desk. There's running mission help desk. So I used to have a contract that would would answer the phones when retirees have OMB government retirees would have questions about their retirement benefits, and they might have contractors just helping on that. So there's a lot of other kinds of analysis support, project management support, general consulting advice. It's really everything from running a military installation to running their air conditioning to doing high-end analytics for the Pentagon, or figuring out how the Department of Veterans Affairs can operate more efficiently. So there's a lot. So it's a wide range of services.
So that's pretty encouraging. Now, to get started, let's talk about some of the rules that you talk about in your book that people should know about. Now, getting started, what should someone consider when it comes to moving in this direction?
Yeah. In terms of starting out, there are definitely advantages for small businesses. If you have any socioeconomic advantages, minority-owned, woman-owned, service-disabled, veteran-owned, there's a lot of preferences for small businesses that have any of those types of statuses. And in fact, for some of those categories, the government is allowed to sole source a contract. That is, they don't even have to compete it. For some small businesses, they can award a contract up to $4 million without even competing it. In other cases, starting out, it might be best to be a subcontractor to a large company. Large companies are required on most of their contracts to use subcontractors for about 30 or 35% of their work. So sometimes starting out, you just know somebody and you get a subcontract. The federal government itself contracts out, prime contracts out to small businesses about 22% of all their contracts. So if you figure their contract's worth about, say, $250 billion a year, you could say that at least 22% of that, 23% are just going to small businesses. That's a lot of money.
Now, one of the things I noticed here when I was reading in your book is something that you say in here, and I found this kind of intriguing because not only is this a book about how you can go about, engaging with government contracts and growing your business, but it's also about your business specifically and growing it and the rules that you have for that as well. And what I got a kick out of this because as I was reading, I thought, this is so true, and you say you can choose your customers, but you can't choose what you do for them. Now, explain what that means.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite expressions there. When you're in the service business for the government, there's really two kinds of companies. There's specialty companies that just do a few number of things, and then there's what are called solution providers or systems integrators in the government lingo. And the job of those companies is to do whatever it takes to make your customers successful. They're the problem solvers. So the idea is if the customer has a problem, you're going to figure out how to solve it. And it may not be what you want to do, but it's what the customer needs. So you've got to do that. I'll give you an example. We were a contract. We had the software development contract for an Army software development center in Washington, D.C. area. So it was software development. The government agency, the Army, was software development. That's what they did. That's what we did. And a number of years ago, the Congress passed a law saying that anybody who fought in the Cold War, that is, anybody who worked for the government from the end of World War II until the Berlin Wall fell down, anybody who worked for the government fought in the Cold War, they were entitled to a certificate signed by the Secretary of Defense. Now, it may seem a little silly, but people actually took that seriously, and I'll tell you that Francis Gary Powers' son, for those of you who know who Francis Gary Powers was, he was a U-2 pilot who was shot down in the Eisenhower administration. He actually showed up in the building with his dad's Silver Star and wanted his certificate. So this was pretty serious. But it turned out that most of the job was running a mailroom. People were sending in copies of documentation that they worked for the government, and we had a staff that printed out certificates and stuffed them in envelopes and sent them out. So we had a mailroom that was a pretty large room, probably 150 square feet of just mailroom. And neither the Army group nor us wanted to run a mailroom. I mean, it wasn't the contract, but we had to do it because that's what they needed. So you do whatever it takes to make your customers successful.
Yeah, like I said, I kind of cracked up thinking, I spent years long before being in radio, for instance, in hospitality. And it's amazing some of the things that people request from you that they consider reasonable. And you're just shaking your head going, what the hell is this all about?
So that's exactly the model. So the model that made us successful and the model that I really recommend for success is to take the model of like a Four Seasons hotel. The concierge there will do anything and some really weird stuff to make a guest stay be a successful stay. They'll do anything, right? And that's the model of a successful government contractor. That's one who knows how to grow and build the trust of customers. That's exactly the model.
And I was going to say, too, on that note, David, it's pretty intriguing that, as I'm just going to blatantly say, as stupid as some of the things that are requested by people seem, when you engage and you go over the top with that, two things actually happen. A, they become one of your greatest customers. I mean, they're going to be coming back like, wow, not only that, they start bringing friends and you think, oh, no, what kind of nuts have I put myself in this fruitcake, right? But the funny thing is it actually gets easier.
Yeah.
And the ones that seemed easy in the beginning tend to become the hardest and most difficult. That's what's strange about that phenomenon. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it is the way to build trust, and that's the whole thing. So the other aspect of the government business people need to understand is that you do want to build long-term. It is in it for the long term. So the government will issue contracts typically with a one-year contract with 4 additional option years. That is, if you do a good job, you're there for 5 years without any further competition. There isn't any other industry that will do that. So what government contractors do is they give us some short-term profit for that long-term stability. So profits are not high, margins are not high, but on the other hand, who else gives you a 5-year contract, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing I wanted to point out now. People might be saying, why do I want to connect and try to work with the government? What are the benefits of it?
Well, most of us who work for the government really feel we're supporting the mission. I mean, it is it is our way of helping the government serve the public. So it is a government service position, frankly. From a business, so everybody I come across really are patriotic. And you've got to be in any business. You got to be in any business because you like doing that kind of work. You've got to be attached to the mission, and the government's pretty wide. So it could be defense because you support the military, but you could be working for HHS or Homeland Security or NIH. I did a lot of work for Health and Human Services and NIH. So to be successful in any business, you've got to really want to help that mission, and that's a big part of it, frankly. And from the business side, it is that long-term stability. That's a different business model. So you focus on building those long-term relationships, building trust, and doing what's right for the customer. You always do what's right for the customer. So if that kind of thing appeals to you, then you'll do well. If you're in it for a quick buck, then I don't know. I think there are other areas.
Yeah, you definitely said money doesn't motivate.
Yeah, well, I said that for a different reason, actually. The
money
doesn't motivate. I mean, two different things by that. One is I learned that in giving short-term bonuses, you give somebody they did a good job, and you give them $50 or $100 or $300, and they put it in their bank account. And if you ask them 6 months later what they did with it, the number one answer is they paid bills. And you know what the number two answer is?
What's that?
It's I don't know. Right? I don't know. It's in my bank account. I don't know what I spent it on. So that doesn't motivate, right? You want to give somebody, if you're going to give them something small, then give them something they'll remember. Buy them a flat-screen TV if that's what they want, or an iPad or something. But, maybe give them a gift card where they have to buy something. But giving them cash they just put in the bank. The other reason, what I meant by money doesn't motivate, is the other thing companies will do is they'll give a holiday bonus in December, and everybody in the company will get $50 or $500 or whatever. And that doesn't motivate either because they're not getting it because they did a good job. They got it because it's December. So when you figure out your rewards and recognition system, you really want to tie it to performance in a way that motivates people to do a better job. You want to tie it to outcomes. You don't want to just tie it to the calendar.
Right. Now, when it comes to finally developing a contract, it seems the government is very thorough about when you make a decision to make a bid for a contract about what you need to have in there before they'll even actually look at it and consider it and then, make a decision on it. How thorough? They're pretty thorough, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really thorough. Number one to win and most of my book is really there in terms of how to really build a business and not just nuts and bolts. But the nuts and bolts, when they say you have to have something in your proposal, it has to be there. What we call that compliance, and you have to be compliant. And if you're not, they just throw you out immediately, even if they like everything else about you. So you have to be. Now, that doesn't make you a winner, but it gets you through the gate.
So now you say that, for instance, once the proposal's in, there are lessons to learn about why you won or lost the contract. Talk about why that's important for people to know.
Yeah, so the government's required to tell you why you lost, to give you what they call a debriefing. And they're required to do it. Some agencies these days don't do a very good job of that. It used to be in person. Now some just do it and it sends you an email. But whether you win or lost, you want to know what you can do better next time. One is mostly you want to know what you can do better. You want to learn from it, and then you apply that lessons learned to your next proposal. You want to learn why the other people won. And I can talk about kind of why people win as well, and the major reasons why people lose. But you want to learn, and even if you won, you want to know what they really liked about it, so you can use that somewhere else. So you always ask for a debriefing. You have to ask for it, but you always ask for it, and the government's required to give it to you. So I tell you the major reason why people win. I'll tell you what I find in debriefs is that more often these days I see in the debriefings that people write good proposals. The problem isn't that people's proposals are bad when they lose. They're good, but somebody else writes a proposal that's outstanding. So, one of the rules is that good proposals don't win because you pretty much assume that everybody writes good proposals. So everybody understands the fundamentals. If the government's asking you to come in and run their network, pretty much everybody knows how to run a network. Or if they're asking you to write this software system or implement an ERP or something, everybody's going to know technically how to do that. The winners, though, go a little bit further, and they, for the most part, they understand how it's really helping the mission. So the RFP, most companies, organizations, whatever it is, they specify a solution. They don't specify why they need it, and people do that too. So the most important rule in my book, it's Rule 4, Dan. It's the rule that says solve the customer's underlying problem. Every time a customer asks you to do something, there's always an underlying problem that they haven't told you about, and sometimes they don't know what it is themselves. So your job is to figure out what that underlying problem is and solve that, and that's true for every business. That's just not government contracting. So that's true for every business. So my sister used to work in the culinary department at Bloomingdale's, and so I tell people, I said, when somebody walks into a Bloomingdale's and asks for, I don't know, a 6-quart Dutch oven or something, I don't even know what that is, but a 6-quart Dutch oven, the salesperson there isn't just supposed to sell them the 6-quart Dutch oven. They're supposed to ask them what they're going to cook it in. Maybe they need a different utensil, or how big they're cooking for. Maybe they need 8-quart or 4-quart. So you have to ask questions and find out why they're asking for it. I was talking to a fellow last week who puts in flooring, and he says, yeah, that's exactly what I do. Somebody will ask for a particular type of floor when they're replacing the flooring in their house, and I'll ask them questions like, is this a high-traffic area? What do you do in this room? That sort of thing. And government contracting is the same way. So when the government says, I want you to run this network or I want you to write this software, why are they doing it? What's that underlying mission they're trying to do? And the people who win are the ones who understand that and can tie their technical approach to how you're helping the customer's mission. So the trick is to have that engagement with the customer where you're asking the right questions and figuring out why they're asking for this.
Now, when you came to write the book and put it together, tell us how you decided to write this in such a way that people can, really differentiate this from a lot of other books about business that are out there.
Yeah, so there's a couple reasons. One, why it's different. One is it's not a book that tells you the rules of government contracting. There are lots of ways you could figure out the rules. This is to tell you how to really grow the business and win. And I didn't see that written down anywhere. There's just nowhere that I saw these things written down. So what happened was I was COO at SRA. I left to join a startup, a venture-backed startup focused on the Internet of what we now call the Internet of Things, and then ran another company, a subsidiary of a commercial company. And we sold that company when the market went south, sold at the end of 2010. So I had some downtime where I wasn't working, and they were paying me, pretty good gig if you can get it, And so I wrote down stories that I always told employees, because the way you propagate a culture, any kind of culture, is through stories, and the way you train people is through stories. So I just wrote down the stories that I always told employees, why we won a job, why we lost a job, things that worked, like motivating, things that didn't work, using money as a motivator, small money. And I just wrote them down. And after a few months, I frankly had about 80 or 90 pages written. And folks said, hey, this is a really, you ought to turn this into a book. And I got an editor who really recommended this format. She says, why don't you use these stories and explain them in terms of a lesson learned? So the book is a lesson learned expressed as a rule followed by a story. And that's kind of how it came to be. And since the book came out, I've been doing consulting, so I have a lot more stories and a lot more lessons learned that I'm working on for a second book.
Oh, very good. Now, one of the things that really caught my chapter that you have in here, and I thought it was kind of funny, but at the same time there's a lot of truth to it, is be a little arrogant.
Yeah, some people have asked me to change that from arrogant to swagger. They thought swagger would be a better term than arrogant, because arrogant has a little bit of negative connotation. But when you're starting out, you have to be confident, and confident in a super way. You have to really believe you can do things. So the way every company has grown, the way every company that I see in the government space, but everywhere else that has grown, I'll ask them, I said, how'd you get to do this for this customer? How'd you get to learn how to do that? And they said, well, we were doing this other thing. The customer trusted us, and they said, can you do this as well? And we said, figured out how to do it. So you have to have this super confidence that says, we can do anything. We're better than the big companies. We're better than the big guys. Yeah, we can do it, and we'll do a better job for you than anyone else will. And then we'll work hard to figure out to make that true. So you have to have that kind of swagger, I think, a little bit, without being too negative.
I agree, definitely.
Yeah, and that's something else that I think is true with every business, right? You don't want to hire your plumber who comes in here and says, well, I guess I can do this,
I might be able to, but I'm not really sure. I've never done that before.
Yeah, you don't want to have that. You don't want that kind of electrician to rewire your house, or fix
right.
I don't know. Maybe I can fix it. Let me give it a shot. I've never done it before, but maybe I could rebuild the motor. No, you don't want that.
Now, all these rules are very important. There's no doubt about that, especially when it comes to building a business and things to consider. And, for instance, one of the things that I noticed you talk about is company culture, and to find, for instance, if you're going to be growing to a big business, you're going to definitely have employees, and how important that is to actually find people who buy into the culture. Now, common sense would tell you why that's important, but in your own words, tell us why that is important.
Yeah, so the aspects of culture that are important. So people will say, well, companies have different cultures. Don't cultures change over time? I mean, I had employees in California and Washington and New York, and if you're international, you have companies overseas. Don't they have different cultures? And I'm like, sure, their cultures are different, but not in ways that matter. The ways that matter are the aspects of culture that are tied to your core values. And that doesn't have to change. I was briefing an HR group of HR professionals, and they said, well, don't cultures change over time as the company gets larger? I mean, SRA started as not a technical company. We were in analysis. we did things like exercise support for the Army, and then all of a sudden we get big and have 100 people running a network at an Army installation or something. Well, yeah, cultures are a little different, but not in ways that matter. So the ways that matter are the ways that are tied to values. And the values are important because that really determines how you do your work. It is what differentiates you from somebody else doing the same thing. And if I can elaborate on that for a minute, Daniel.
Yes, please.
One of the things I learned is every company has published a set of values. I forget what it was, but there was one company whose values were something like integrity and communication and respect or something, and that was Enron. So these published values are frequently don't mean anything. And what I learned, I actually learned it from Netflix, is that values are the behaviors and skills that you value. That is, what are the behaviors that you use to promote people, to reward people, to hire people, to not promote people, to let people go? What are those behaviors? And that's what a company has to focus on, because as you grow, that's what, one is, it's what really separates you. It's what maintains your reputation. And when you get large, that's about the only thing a CEO and a COO can influence, really. I mean, when we're $1 billion, or if you're $10 billion, you're not making day-to-day decisions on how to bid a job or what to do. All you can do is influence and make sure the culture stays as it is. And I've seen it where the key aspects of culture don't have to change when you're an $11 billion company, let alone a $1 billion company. So that's really what makes one company different from another. It's really who you are. And what I urge small businesses to do is not just to think about the kind of work they want to do, but to think about the kind of company they want to be. What kind of company do they want to have? If you're an owner of a small business, it's not just what do you want to do, it's what do you want to be? What kind of company do you want to be? And companies are different, values are different, they reflect the CEO, but you want to use that to decide who you hire, who becomes a supervisor, who becomes a manager. And that's eventually what the employees will see as the difference. And I have this other rule that says on differentiation, if your employees can't tell why you're different, your customers can't either. And your employees are going to see your differentiation mostly from your culture and your values. So, there's this old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it's true.
Absolutely. A wonderful, valuable book for people who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs, people who are entrepreneurs, and certainly people who have been in business and want to see their business grow. It is 0 to a Billion. Our guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program, David Kriegman. Is there a website people can find out more about your work, how they can get a hold of the book, things like that?
Yeah, I don't really keep it up to date, but it is the number 2, the letter B, z2b-llc.com, Z2B, or they can email me at david@z2b-llc.com. The number 2, the letter B-llc.com. David at z2b-llc.com.
Very good. David, thank you for being on the program today.
Well, thank you. Enjoyed it.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter to keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.